Because the truth is, we all want to be our own king. We all want to have our own say-so over our life. We want that control. We want that authority. And it would be interesting to see what would happen in the American church if we took the energy and effort and focus that we put into trying to make Jesus king of our nation and instead tried to make Jesus the king of our own life and the king of our own heart.
Yeah.
Do that level of work there. I think that would be very, very interesting.
Welcome to Let's Talk About That, the podcast where we take a deeper dive into Sunday's message and explore any questions you might have. I'm your host, AJ Stevens, joined by lead pastor Chip Parker, and I'm thrilled to be on this journey with you. Whether you're a longtime member of the Orchard or a first-time visitor, Let's Talk About That is your space to explore, reflect, and connect. Join us as we navigate the intricacies of faith, spirituality, and daily life, seeking to understand how the wisdom shared on Sundays can be applied to our modern challenges. So grab a cup of coffee, find a comfortable space, and let's dive in together. This is Let's Talk About That, where the conversation about Sunday's message never stops. We're back, and that means something this week because we weren't back last week. And
that was the first podcast that we've missed since we started it this year.
Yeah, and I heard about it. I got some texts saying,
hey, from our dozens of listeners.
Dozens of listeners.
But obviously, there was a reason we didn't record. Reason was named Debbie.
Yeah, not even little Debbie.
Big Deborah.
Yeah, had a lot of rain for us. So, we're obviously still dealing with a lot of that. How did you guys fare?
We were good. We lost power for, not quite 48 hours. Obviously, a lot of rain. Our neighbor's house across the street, they got it bad. They're like in a low area depression. So, water got in their house. It was bad. The only loss that we had at the Parker house, we did not find until yesterday when we were going outside and I was getting ready to grill something. And I realized, I guess the rain had set on the grill cover and it got so much that it tore it. And so it just soaked my grill and it's just so it's
the Blackstone.
Yeah, well, the knockoff Blackstone.
Devastating.
Yeah, so that one's done now. I'm gonna maybe look at trying to clean it, but it look real
like
nasty.
Rust or whatever.
Rust. It just sat there, pretty much all week because I didn't grill out all week. We had stuff going on and went to go use it this weekend. Didn't know that the cover had torn because it was one of those vinyl covers or whatever. Yeah. But obviously, way better than most people.
Yeah, but it's still a hit because at your age, right, 40, that starts to become an identity, right? Traegers and Blackstones and
white tennis shoes, mowing lawns. I opted the pitfall route. I jumped ahead 20 years.
I like it.
So how about White Springs?
White Springs is fine. We always lose power. I feel like if the wind gets above 11 miles per hour, we're going to lose power at our house, so it was inevitable. And so we played the generator shuffle because I'm too cheap to buy one. And
what, you played the generator shuffle?
Yes. So we had borrowed one from some friends whose power didn't go out, and then Lake City lost power after the storm, which was ridiculous for whatever reason. And so after the storm had left, they lost power. So we were like, well, we need to give it back to them. So we didn't even ask them. We just took it back. And then, borrowed another one from somebody else. That one didn't want to work, so then we had to go find another one, and it was just a whole thing. And at the end of it, me and Katie are like, we should have just bought one. We should have just not been cheapies.
Yeah. The hard part is hurricane season now, so they can be tough to come by.
Right.
But I think they have started pushing into Florida during hurricane season the last few years because I actually saw some in stock on Tuesday.
Yeah,
this past week.
Well, Lowe's had them. Yeah, Lowe's had them. Fueled had a bunch, but I don't know, man. It's the other thing is, I think this is 2 hurricanes in the last 2 years, obviously, for Big Bend region. But until then, it had been how many years?
Oh, yeah. It had been a hot minute.
So,
but
I don't know.
How crazy was it? It was Hurricane Debbie that flooded Live Oak.
Yeah.
That's insane.
It is.
We say, it just so happens, never just happens. And usually we don't mean hurricanes when we say that,
right.
But it was just crazy to me. The more you think about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
The last 2 times in the last, 50 plus years that downtown Live Oak has been legitimately flooded was Hurricane Debbie.
Yep.
That's crazy to me.
There is, I think I said this to somebody, there's a Jonah in Live Oak named Debbie, and they need to get out. They need to confess. They need to come forward. I don't know what's going on over there, but there is clearly...
So in Live Oak, there's no longer a Karen. It's a Debbie.
It's a Debbie. Debbie, come forward.
Man.
Just kidding, in case you're actually wearing the brunt of that shame.
Well, the truth is we're making light of it because we're native Floridians, and it's not the first nor last hurricane we'll go through. But, man, there were some people that really did get hit hard. But it's always awesome to see the community rally around people when it happens.
Agree. That's one of my favorite parts to watch, honestly. And I think the last one was really like a tone setter because people got to see what buy-in did for their community. And so this time it was like you're hardly hearing about it because I don't think anybody's thinking twice about it. They're just diving in and helping out. And, everybody's almost got it to a science at this point, which is tough, but it's been really cool to see at that point. So you have that, and I don't want to make light of it, but one of the things that as a native Floridian you kind of come to terms with is that there's going to be storms, especially August, September, and you're going to have power outages, there's going to be hurricanes. And so growing up as a Central Florida native, we found things to do during the hurricane. Like we would have a lot of fun doing different things.
Like what?
Well, so for us, we would take the ATVs and we would go down the ditches.
You mean four-wheelers?
Well, yeah, four-wheelers. Okay. Well, side-by-sides, all that kind of stuff. We had Polarises.
Well, it doesn't matter what they are, and up here they're four-wheelers.
Yeah, sure. Fair enough. Like Jiffy stores and carts and buggies, understood. And we'd skimboard a lot, and I don't know, we would just find all kinds of things to do, play games inside. So what about you? What are some things that you guys...
Similar, a little bit different maybe for me growing up with my dad being a cop over in Perry. It seemed like we were always involved, helping out, doing something, feeding the workers. But when I was in college, I had always had a goal at the little Christian college that I went to. I've talked about it. They had a big, thick rule book called The Guide with the most obscure rules in the rule book. Like they were just like random, like, okay, they put that in there because of somebody rules.
Yeah.
And so I decided like early on my freshman year, but when I graduate, I want them to have had to add a rule to this book because of me. Just something like totally obscure, that they had to do. And so you remember the year that the three hurricanes.
Charlie,
yep,
Ian and Francis, or Ivan and Francis.
I think it was Ivan and Francis.
Yeah.
And so I was in school in Clearwater at that time, and the campus would get like flooded.
Oh, yeah, we didn't go to school for like a month.
So one of those storms, I was actually at the campus still, and they had us all in the gym who were there, kind of sheltered in, hanging out, and it was raining, pouring, and so I snuck out, and in front of the cafeteria administration building at the small college was a big pond, like a brackish pond that was called Lake Jogalot. Right?
Jogalot.
Lake Jogalot. And so during the hurricane, when nobody was out there to see nor stop me, me and a couple of guys went out there, and I jumped in Lake Jogalot and went swimming.
Did you jog a lot or a little on the way?
I didn't jog at all.
Okay.
And everybody was like freaked out because most of the kids at our school actually weren't Floridians. Right. They were, from Michigan or Pennsylvania, Ohio. And so it freaked them out. Number one, it was a brackish pond. Number two, there was a gator that would hang out around the pond or whatever. So they're all freaked out. And I'm swimming because I'm a redneck, and it didn't matter to me. And I'm like, this is going to be it. Yeah. This is going to be my rule that's going in the guide. And sadly enough, all they did was put up a sign that said no swimming afterwards. So I think I might get a rule, but it was
it's rule enough. I mean, you got a permanent sign, man.
Well, the college is closed down now, and none of it's there anymore, so...
You had a permanent.
I had a permanent. I had a temporary permanent sign.
Man, so but we're past the hurricane, which is good. And now I feel like very quickly everybody got back to normal, and back to normal in August, end of August this school year. So you have a unique perspective on the school year.
Oh, I do.
Because you are a dad.
Yep.
With 2 kids in the school system.
Indeed.
But you're also a husband to a wife in the school system. So tell me what Chip Parker's household looks like in the weeks leading up to school and the week of school.
It usually looks like more getting the classroom ready than the kids ready.
Okay.
Hey, can you load this in my car? Hey, can you meet me at the school so we can unload this this year? Hey, can you build me this table for my kids, in the classroom? So there's a lot of that going on. Luckily, my boys, neither one of them it doesn't bother them to go back to school. They'd rather not, probably, but it doesn't bother them. That they were fine. However, I think what was funny is we have an administrator of one of our local schools that goes to our Lake City campus.
Location.
Dadgummit, it's been years since I said that.
Yeah.
Our Lake City location. And I was talking to her yesterday, and she made this statement that I thought was spot on. She says, ain't no stress like back to school stress.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, well, that's it, because everybody's just a little bit on edge because nobody's like really thrilled about all this,
Yep.
However, this may seem unrelated, but it's entirely related. NCAA 25 came out this summer. Right?
Yeah.
And I almost bought a PlayStation 5, but I didn't because I was turning 40 and it kind of felt childish for me. And so instead, I bought the game for my son's Xbox and continually am looking for ways to ground him so that I can take the Xbox.
I love it.
But the kids were in school.
Yeah.
The wife is in school Friday. Friday's our day off.
Oh, because they went back early.
Yeah, they started last week, right?
Belmont. Yeah.
So Friday's our day off here at the church. And so Friday means the kid doesn't have his Xbox.
That's right.
The wife isn't home to watch TV. So Friday is college football day at the Parker household, baby. I got the sweater vest on, the visor, the
sweater
board.
vest.
I'm just like channeling my inner Spurrier calling plays up.
Yeah. Full Bear Bryant, where he was a suit.
He was suit. Spurrier was the best advisor.
Yeah. So, okay. So let me ask you this. Can you go cross platforms with NCAA or no?
Can and have.
Okay, so we could play after I mooch somebody else's because I have neither.
Yeah.
But we could play.
I mean, if you want to catch that beat down, we absolutely can play.
Yeah. Ask Trey how that went. Shout out to Trey Lee for getting absolutely wrecked when I went over to his house. Man, there's got to be something shameful about having the console and having your buddy who doesn't have a console come over and just whacks you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Shout out Trey. Love you, Trey. Man, Trey's doing awesome things. I got to see him pray. A post where he prayed with some of his students this morning. He's kind of transitioning. We love what he's doing with FCA. The other thing in regard to football that's happening right now, and I want to put this on here real quick because I want to shout out any of you who do this because I think the community is always worth looking at as far as it grows. But we are coming up on fantasy football season, Chip.
Buddy, what do you mean coming up on? You never leave fantasy football season.
It's true. Well, you never leave dynasty season, and we're in dynasty, and it has been a whole thing. But we would love, without getting too much into
fantasy football, love it.
Yeah, we would love any fantasy football connoisseurs to find us.
So let us know.
Yeah.
Let us know. Matter of fact, it's going to leak into the podcast at some point because AJ and I are in 2 leagues together, and it's going to happen.
Walked in the office, and Chip said, hey, trade me that guy.
That's 100%, and it was Nico Collins, by the way. All right, so here's the question, Chris Deucer. Is fantasy football a real sport or a fake sport? I have this argument with my wife all the time.
About playing fantasy football?
Yeah. She said, you're just over there playing like a fake game, a made-up game. Well, number one, all games are made up.
Is it?
Somebody made it up at some point, but she's like, yes, it's not real. It's fake. I was like, well, give me your answer. It's 100% real.
Yeah. Interesting.
It's real. It's real guys on the field making real plays, and the way that you just count the score is different. Just throwing that out there. It's a real thing.
Interesting. I don't know what my answer would have been, Chris. I'm surprised you gave a definitive yes, it's real, because I'm not sure.
Deucer knows what's up.
It's a game. I don't know how I would classify that.
It's real.
Maybe it is. I mean, I'm not saying it's not real. It's very much
It's
real,
not fake.
and you're very much dependent. I just don't know if it's a game or a degenerate addiction.
It can be both. You've seen kids on Minecraft. It can be both.
That's true. Touche. Yeah, well, we want you to let us know, one, because I like having other people to kind of view trades with me and see how they're coming out. I have a secret stash of people that I use as advisors, but I'm always open to more. So
crowd sources.
If that's you, let's have that
taught
conversation.
AJ Stevens how to play fantasy football.
You did.
And now he throws my same trading tricks right back in my face.
You did. You showed me, and
a 2-time league champion.
You said quickly turn around. I appreciate it. Look at Chris Deucer dropped this in the notes. Game, a form of play or sport, especially a competitive one played according to rules and decided by skill, strength, or luck.
Well, if it hadn't had luck in there, we might not could have counted it, but fantasy football is definitely a combination of skill and luck.
Yeah.
And the fantasy football leagues that determine draft order by their own combine, I guess you'd include strength in that as well.
That's amazing.
It's crazy. Have you seen that?
Yes.
Oh, they're hilarious.
Yes. And
could you imagine our league doing like a 40-yard to try and determine draft order?
Well, just about every time I watch one of those, I see somebody blow up a hammy.
Oh, the hammies are being blown.
It would for sure happen. So that's good. Let us know. But we'll kind of transition to something serious because I doubt people really want to listen to us talk about
this thing. It's been a minute.
Yeah. So we started a brand new series, and we were going to introduce this last week, but obviously the hurricane happened and things of that nature. But we started a series called Answers from Jesus, and I think unanimous consensus was everybody loves kind of the idea, direction of that as far as our staff goes, and then you did a lot of the putting it together with this series in particular, and so I would love to know, how has it been for you as you've walked through a lot of this stuff in your private study time? Has there been any, man, I didn't see that coming from Jesus, or I see this in a new light as I've started to unpack some of that stuff as he's answered people or not answered people?
Yeah, I think for me, the big meta takeaway has been in kind of my introduction to the series the last 2 weeks, and that is how many times Jesus really didn't answer the question, because, and I've said this, if you've been in Lake City, you've heard me. If you watched online, you've heard it. He was asked over 180 questions. I think it's 189. And he answered, and I've been saying less than 10 of them, which is true.
Right.
But the most,
the consensus.
So the consensus of how many he actually answered clearly and directly and simply, 3. Some give him up to 9, which is why I say less than 10 based on how you read it. But 3. So when you look at that, it's like, why wouldn't he answer their questions? And it really hit me. And again, I've said it in the messages. It really hit me that it's because Jesus is going to answer the questions that we should be asking.
Right.
He's going to tell us about the things that we really need to know. If we could see what he sees, if we knew what he knew, then this is what we would want to know. It's kind of like that thing where you say, God, and I've used this as a joking kind of illustration for a while. God, I'll believe that you're real if I wake up in the morning and there's $100 million underneath my bed. I'll believe that you're real.
Right.
And we talk about how God does not answer that because he's not real, right? God doesn't answer that because he knows that's not what you need if that's the prayer you're praying, right? Yeah. And so I think it's the same thing here. Jesus gives us an answer to all these questions, but it's the answer that they needed to hear. And then to take it that next step further, I think the series is so important because the answers he gave then are timeless still for us today. They're still relevant and bear on us today. And so I think that's maybe the big kind of meta overarching takeaway that I've had for this series. It's that, he didn't answer a lot of questions, quote unquote, but he did answer what we really needed to know. And so what I've kind of said to start out every message is, if Jesus answers a question, we need to pay attention.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. You and I are pretty confident people, I would say, just so that I don't have to use the word arrogant.
Right.
But has it made you reshape the way that you listen to people, understand people? Because I feel like, the natural inclination for everybody is, hey, here's the question, you give them an answer, right? Has it made you stop and be like, let me see what the question within the question is, or I'm just going to give them the answer? Has it done any of that to you, seeing Jesus do that? Or
no.
Okay.
No. And honestly, I guess I would say no, because AJ, you've been around me long enough to know that I usually, in a conversation like that, know where I want it to go, and I'm already going to be trying to steer the conversation to go that way anyway.
Right.
But at the end of the day, also, I am not like Jesus in the fact that a lot of the reason that you see Jesus answer questions the way he did is his, wisdom and humility.
Right.
And I'm not sure how high I score on those scales sometimes of wisdom and humility. So I'll just jump out and say, well, all right, here's the answer. Let me just tell you the answer. And that's not the best way to go. But I mean, honestly, that's kind of my default as a quote confident person,
Yeah.
And it was so funny because we shot that video that Chris has been cutting up for us and putting clips in about, hey, these are questions people said that they wanted to ask to Jesus. And we had this long conversation before we shot the video about, hey, like, we're not just trying to answer all these questions. The point of this isn't to answer all these questions on behalf of Jesus. What did we wind up doing by the end of the video? Answering all the questions,
Jesus,
So I would love to tell you that I have molded my answers to look more like Jesus' answers, but truthfully, probably not that much.
Yeah, there is one guy, because I was thinking about this, and there's one guy on our staff who does a good job of this, of like, and it shouldn't shock us who it is, but of modeling his responses similarly to Jesus. And I don't think he does it because Jesus did. I just think that's who he is. And you see a lot of that humility in him is Eddie, Pastor Eddie. Usually when you're having a conversation, I can think of over a dozen times where he's been like, well, why do you think that is? Or, he'll answer the question with a question and get you thinking. And you're like, I don't know, that kind of thing. But I think he does a great job of that. It's pretty intriguing.
Yeah, I think it's funny. My whole ministry life, a lot of people have always said, do you know who you remind me of? Do you know a guy named Eddie Blaylock? Nope, never met the guy in my life. And I had. He is my mentor. He married Leanne and I. So funny. You remind me of Eddie. You remind me of Eddie. But I think those of us who work on staff here together, yeah, I'm sure, I've got some of Eddie in me, but there's a lot of differences between Eddie and I. And that is one of the big ones, that Eddie is very much humble and consensus driven. And I'm like, all right, let's throw it down. Let's see what we got.
What is our saying? You're always confident, but not always certain, or something along those lines? Or maybe it's...
I said I'm always certain, rarely correct.
Right. There you something along those lines, yeah.
No, the joke is that I'm always clear, even if I'm not certain. Michael is going to be certain, and so until he is, he's going to be very unclear.
Yeah, Michael's our executive pastor. All right, so let me ask you this then. So you have been the one, spearheading this series, and I'm curious, has there been a question that you've had? And I know we all have a lot of questions, but what would be one that you're comfortable sharing that you say, man, if it wasn't in heaven and Jesus was right here, and I wouldn't necessarily not care because I'm in heaven, but I would care because he's right here with me right now, what question would you ask him?
I have a lot of those personal type questions that we've talked to and alluded to in the series. Those of you who know me and my story know that kind of walking through my mom's passing at 50 years old from cancer, right before our youngest son was born, immediately moving to the orchard, that's a big part of my story. And I got a lot of questions, around that. And one of them, I joke about often is the whole, well, why does it have to be her? Why can't it be blank? This is a public podcast, but I will fill in the blank. Why can't it be somebody else? And that I think that's a real question that I had. I wouldn't say that I was ever angry with God, disagreed with God. In a lot of ways, I still disagree in the sense that if I had my choice, that would not have been the choice I would take. But I think I have enough faith and humility to know I'm really glad that God's the one who made that choice and not me.
Yeah.
Because I trust that he sees further, knows better, loves deeper than I do. So he's the one who needed to make that choice, even if I probably would have made a different one. But what I have really found around a lot of those questions that I would ask Jesus is that I have kind of found the theological answer already. Like, well, why do good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people? Why does God choose to heal some? Why does God have to send anybody to hell? Why can't everybody, those questions that really are not taken lightly, those are problematic, hard questions. Well, if you study enough, if you read enough, listen, there's answers to all those questions. Mm-hmm. But what I have found is, and I think this, is just really a confirmation of what I learned about Jesus and how he answers questions, is the answers to those questions never do for us what we want them to do.
Right.
Right? Like, if we ask why, even if we were to know why, it really doesn't change our opinions.
Yeah.
Like, God, if you showed me why my mom had to die, God, if you showed me why I lost my child in a car accident, God, if you showed me why I'm suffering with this terminal illness, I'm sure the majority of the time, the why wouldn't move our needle. I wouldn't make that trade. I wouldn't do that. Okay, yeah, I understand that's your why. I think that's a bad why,
Sure, right.
And so I don't think why ever brings the satisfaction, peace, closure, whatever that we want it to. And so really, I think in a lot of ways that has alleviated a lot of questions that I've had for Jesus, in the fact that, okay, I know the answer, but it doesn't change what I feel in that moment. And so instead of really asking the question, I think in my life, the last decade or so, it's been more, God, I need you to change my heart. God, I need you to change the way I feel about this. Because I feel pretty confident of the, quote, why or how behind some stuff in a big picture sense, right?
Yeah.
But what I really need you to do is change my heart so that I can have a peace with that. Change my heart so that I trust you. Grow my faith. Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief, right, kind of thing. And so really the questions that I want to ask Jesus now more than anything else are, okay, Jesus, what decision do I need to make right here? Mm-hmm. Jesus, where are you leading in this? Jesus, Who's the next person that we need to bring on our staff at the church?
Yeah.
Those are the kind of questions I find myself asking now. Not so much the why questions, but the what, the who, the how. Those are the kind of questions I see myself asking most often now.
Yeah, it's good. I think that's insightful. I think it's difficult, and I think though, in not as many words, what I'm hearing you say is even if Jesus laid it out, his transcendent understanding, his why, we would not be content with his why because we don't have the understanding he has.
Yeah, maybe we would, if it was a clear and obvious why, like, how about this? As a parent, if something were to happen to me physically, medically, whatever, and through, a hopeful by God's sovereignty, my faithfulness in my suffering, that both my boys would love Jesus, follow Jesus, and live more like Jesus. As a dad, if that's the why, I'll make that trade 10 times out of 10.
Yeah.
If it's the same thing, but for somebody who I just know because we're friends on Facebook, I'm probably not going to want to make that trade. Right?
Sure.
And so I'm not saying that the why behind something is something we would never choose or understand.
Right.
I'm just saying far too often the why is not what we think it is. And if it's not something immediately on our radar, it's not a trade we're going to make. So I would say most often it's probably not a trade we would make because we don't feel that same way, right? Because at the end of the day, I have more concerns for my family than 5 families down the street.
Yeah, you don't love Joe Schmo like Jesus loves Joe Schmo.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, he's got that. Yeah, he has that transcending understanding, transcending love that we're honestly not capable of in many ways because you only have so much capacity. And one of my favorite epiphanies about the human is there's a study in like the 1990s, I think, that came out and said, hey, we're intellectual creatures. And then there was a study that came out in opposition to it, I think in 2018 or 2019, that basically came out and refuted that study and said, hey, baseline was wrong. This is not true. Humans are not intellectual creatures first. They're emotional creatures first. And if that's true, and that's the thing that's driving our decision-making, informing us on a regular basis, then we're going to struggle with a cognitive understanding of something because we're not going to process it cognitively first. We're going to process it emotionally first. And if that's our first foot in the door, then we're going to struggle with a lot of the things that we can't control emotionally because they're not always under our control. And we struggle with that.
Right.
So it makes sense.
Right.
It's good. I think for me, if I was going to ask Jesus one question, I've thought about this a lot actually since our series, and I think I don't really have any personal so much as theological here.
Yeah.
And I think for me, the personal and the theological come together, and I would ask him, Jesus, where's the line? Where's the line between someone crossing over from death to life? Not the biblical, theological. We understand.
You got to unpack that for me.
Yeah, we understand if they believe in their heart, confess with their mouth that Jesus is Lord and that God raised him from the dead. My question would be, I guess maybe not the where's the line, but how can I clearly see the line better? And I think I want to understand that better for the individual because every individual is going to be nuanced and every individual is going to be unique. But man, it's so interesting.
So are you talking like people who would assume that they're saved but might not be, or people who are still questioning but may have come to faith and they're just still figuring stuff out like that? Is that what you're talking about?
All the above. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to know, and because I think it informs how you navigate those conversations, and maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But to me, that's the question I ask. Jesus, give me some clear indicators here.
Jesus put a halo over the head of everybody who's already saved.
Right. Exactly right. So that would probably be mine.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity as a pastor, as a friend to a lot of people, because the personal, again, you have these friends of yours that are like, man, I've been in this season and you've seen them win, and now you're seeing them in a season of loss and, falling away, walking away, whatever. And I think there's just a big part of me that wants to know, like, how do I need to approach this as a lost person or as somebody who just needs some revitalization? Or
I think for me, just pastorally, I think that's why the gospel is so amazing, because the gospel is good news to the lost and the saved.
Yeah.
Right? The gospel justifies, but it also sanctifies.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why it's so important for us to keep our message centered on Jesus and the gospel, because it hits both where they are.
Yeah.
I think that there are people who are saved who have walked away from the faith, but are going to ultimately come back.
Right.
But if they've walked away, even temporarily, I think for me, I've just always kind of treated that person as, okay, they're acting like an unbeliever. So that's how I'm going to, treat them in many ways. And if a person is, not walked away, they're active in church, but you still look at them like, I think there's still some stuff missing. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt, because I think salvation is at the same time the simplest thing, but the hardest thing.
Right, that part.
Yeah,
that's the heart of my question.
Simple,
right there. Yeah,
because it's not, well, if you're a good person, you keep this, you're obedient, all these things. Okay, then you're saved. No, you're saved by grace through faith.
Right.
Boom. That's it. Right. However, it's hard because we can't ever know the full motivations of our heart. I think that's why Paul tells us to work out our own salvation with fear and trembling. But I say all of that to say, a professor in seminary kind of helped give me a little bit of peace around that when he says our problem is that we have a very short view of time, right? We want to see it right now.
Right.
He goes, but the truest test of a person's salvation is their perseverance and their preservation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, that's what's so hard for me sometimes, because, it's going to be the course of their life is going to tell the story, not the ups and downs of the immediate seasons of 2021, 2022, 2023. And that's hard. So I do feel that. It'd be easier if God would just slap a halo on their head. Be like, all right, good, check.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to know him in 50 years, God. I want to know now, but, and that's the tension for sure. So, yeah, I think that'd be an intriguing conversation. But I also think our conversations that we've had the first 2 weeks have been intriguing. And it's been interesting to see, not hypothetically, here's my question, Jesus, what would you say? But actually, here's the question, Jesus, what would you say? And in the first week, we had the conversation around Jesus specifically, and him saying, hey, I am the king, and I may not be the king in your understanding of the king. I am a king who transcends your understanding of what kingship looks like and what kingdoms look like. And so our big point of emphasis as we unpacked that conversation was, here's the objective reality. Jesus is king. That is true, whether you like it or not. It is not up for discussion. It's not a debate. This is what's happening right now on planet Earth. In the spiritual realms, Jesus is king. The question becomes, okay, is Jesus my king? And are you the king of my life? And so I would love to hear from you. Why do you think that's such a prominent conversation for Jesus to answer candidly, a question for him to answer candidly, to have our conversation around? And then really and truly, I guess the other question for you would be, why do people struggle with the reality of that answer so much?
Well, I think for me, the first importance of that answer is Jesus is a king, but his kingdom is not of this world. And I think that there has been a movement in the American evangelical church that probably started in the 70s, 80s, where there was a growing desire for cultural influence and power in the church. And I think a lot of the motivations behind it by most people were probably positive, like, hey, look, we just want the country we live in to reflect the values that we hold, and the values that we hold are driven by what we believe the Bible teaches. But I think in a lot of ways, the American evangelical church got tangled up with the idea that it is our job to bring Jesus's kingdom into this earth through the ballot box.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus reminds us that, no, guys, my kingdom is not of this world. If I needed, he said, if my kingdom had been of this world, I would have had an army that wouldn't have ever let you catch me.
Mm-hmm.
That's not how my kingdom is designed. That's not how my kingdom is set up. And so I think that it's a good reminder that we are citizens of a kingdom and that Jesus is king, but we do not usher in his kingdom through political candidates, military might, territorial power. That's not what the kingdom of Jesus looks like. I think that the second part of the question you asked, though, why do people struggle with that, is because we really don't want Jesus to be king in the sense of what a king means. And I look at the American evangelical church. We want to equate Jesus with freedom and democracy.
Yeah.
Right? Christianity equals freedom and democracy.
We wanted Jesus to be, really, in a lot of ways, what the Pharisees wanted Jesus to be.
Yeah.
This government overthrowing, liberating individual.
Yeah. And then get out of the way because I don't want you to tell me what to do either.
Right.
But the truth is, Jesus is king over his kingdom. He is an, hear me, authoritarian dictator. He is not gathering a quorum of his 12 disciples and letting them vote in a parliamentary model.
True.
Jesus is, it is not an autocracy. It's not a monarchy. It's a theocracy. He is the king. He is Lord over all, final say. It's not, he says it, I believe it, that settles it. No, he says it, that settles it. I don't care if you believe it or not.
Right.
And we don't want that. At least we don't want it all the time. Maybe at our best moments, we want that, but we don't want that all the time because we don't want Jesus to say, hey, no, you can't go fishing tonight. Right. Yeah. You got something else to do. Mm-hmm. Hey, no, you can't misreport on your taxes because you don't like the policies that are making you pay those taxes. No, you can't fill in the blank even though you feel like you should be able to, because the truth is we all want to be our own king. We all want to have our own say-so over our life. We want that control. We want that authority. And it would be interesting to see what would happen in the American church if we took the energy and effort and focus that we put into trying to make Jesus king of our nation and instead tried to make Jesus the king of our own life and the king of our own heart.
Yeah.
Do that level of work there. I think that would be very, very interesting.
Especially considering and understanding the fact that Jesus is not going to contradict himself. And so if you have 1 million people under the same kingship walking in the same direction, okay, now you've just solved your problem in many ways. And there's going to be some human error in there, but you're going to get maybe not what you want at its face value, but you're going to get what you thought you wanted. You're going to get kingship, and you're going to get millions of people following that king. And if they're all following the same king who's got the same direction, the same insight, then here we go. Now you have a nation under a kingship, but it's not going to happen outside of that lens of individual surrender. It's got to be, I think, individual surrender, and that's what will lead to really church movements, revival, awakening, all that kind of stuff.
And it's not to say there's not room for differing of belief or interpretation.
Right.
Like, of course there is. But I think what you're talking about is the heart of how we advance the kingdom here on earth.
Mm-hmm.
We do not legislate the kingdom. We do not vote the kingdom. Now, don't mishear me. I am a ethics and morality voter. Like, I look at policies. I like policies. I actually like politics, but that's not what drives my vote. My vote is driven by what do I believe to be the most moral, ethical, and because I'm a believer, biblical platform.
Right.
That's what I'm going to vote for. However, I know that I'm not going to transform eternity by ushering in a legislated morality upon our country.
Yeah.
That our country is going to be transformed not as a nation, but neighbor by neighbor.
Yeah.
That's how we're going to see our country transform. I think that's what you're describing. Like, it would be a night and day shift in the American church if we saw the most important, quote, target of the kingdom not as our nation, but as our neighbor.
Yeah. Which is a phenomenal segue to the following week, because Jesus understands this, right? And I think this is where we get it convoluted and we try to figure it out on our own instead of just, hey, Jesus, what do you think? How would you answer this? And when you understand what Jesus is talking about when he talks about ushering in his kingdom and he talks about who he is as a king, you see the conversation we had this past week, which is, hey, Jesus, okay, tell me, what are the most important rules in your kingdom? What are the most important rules if we're going to get this right?
If there's 613 commandments,
yeah,
which I'm not going to remember all of,
yeah,
because every time I go to the store, I forget something while I'm there, and I've never had a 613 item list,
Right.
Well, what's the greatest commandment?
Yeah.
Which is the greatest commandment? And Jesus, says, hey, it's simple. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength. Love your neighbor as yourself.
Yep. And now, if you do that, people, you have little individuals with one king, the same king with the same mission. Hey, love the person next to you. And here you go. There's the model Jesus lays out. Love me, listen to me, let me guide you, let me rule you. And here's what that's going to do. It's going to compel you to love the person next to you. And when the person next to you knows that they're loved, knows that I love them, boom, there's another person added to the kingdom.
Well, I think what is so fascinating to me, and I did mention this online, but I did mention it live in Lake City this week, is the idea that in cultural politics, and I would say it's not just American politics, there's a left and right in every political system.
Sure.
That typically the left feels like they have a corner on loving people.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not on our side of the issue, you don't really love people. You're a bigot, you're closed-minded, you don't care about others. It's all about the rich and the wealthy and what you want them to look like and who you want them to love. And, they think they've got the corner on what it means to love people. And then on the right, well, they feel like they have the corner on what it means to love God.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't agree with us, if you're not on our side, then you don't love God, because this is who loves God, because we want these things that are clearly moral, even if the people who are telling us about them are some of the most immoral people, right?
Irony.
That we want, we love God, and if you're, not with us, then you don't love God.
Right.
And yet Jesus says, look, you don't choose sides on this issue. You love God and you love people.
Yeah.
And you love God by loving people. And it's not up to you to decide what is loving for someone.
Yeah.
Because I've defined for you what love looks like. I've illustrated for you what love looks like on the cross. And so you love others, Jesus says, as I have loved you.
Yeah.
Right? And so we don't get to pick and choose. We have to fight to hold on to the both and that's really hard to do sometimes, because the world is going to try to push us into one side or the other. Are you going to be on my side and love God? Are you going to be on my side and love people? And Jesus says, no, you don't get to pick sides. You have to do both.
Yeah. So do you remember that Matt Chandler quote? Do you have it offhand? Because I think he was having this conversation, and I think he had a phenomenal quote in regard to this conversation, where he basically said, hey, the left, they want the kingdom, but they don't want the king. And the right, they want the king, but they don't want the kingdom, or something of that nature.
I think I have heard him say that, but yeah. I don't remember that right offhand.
Yeah, we'll see. I got Chris
we'll see
on
if
the job.
Yeah,
I got him
hop on it.
Him hunting it down.
But I think that's a great way to look at it. I've even said before, you look at the left and right, the king, the kingdom, loving God, loving people. You just look at how each side sees people and what they claim to believe, right?
Yeah.
The left believes in the inherent goodness of mankind, right? That we should all follow our hearts, and yet they want to legislate for us what everything looks like and what we have to do, right? Big government. And the right is like, no, we believe in the inherent sinfulness of mankind, that mankind is inherently sinful, and yet what they say is, let's deregulate everything and let everybody just have at it, know? And it's kind of like, there's such contradictions in all those positions. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, that was it. Chris, of course, found it in less than 30 seconds. Shout out to Chris.
Sure.
But the left wants the kingdom, but not the king, because they love them. They love the ethic. They love the inherent goodness of people, right? Like you're saying. And then the right wants the king, but they don't want the kingdom. They don't want the person looking over their shoulder telling you, hey, this is what it should be like, and this is not open for democracy. This is very much me telling you I'm king, and what I say goes.
Well, I think that also goes back to Tim Keller unpacked that a little bit more when he talked about what were some of the 4 markers of the early church. He said that, there were things in the early church that set them against the culture of the day. And he said there are 4 things that the church should still stand for today. And those 4 things, he says, number 1 are a multi-ethnic church. It was a church that pushed back against the racism of the days, Jews, Gentiles, that kind of thing. Number 2, it was a church that was committed to the poor, to the sick, to the marginalized on the fringes of society. Number 3, that the church was a church that was about reconciling man to God, right? And the authority of the Word of God. And then number 4, the church was inherently a pro-life church. And that was something that you can trace back to the earliest parts of the church.
Yeah.
The dignity of every human life, women, children, the sick, the infirm, like those were 4 markers of the early church. And then what Keller points out is, but today, the left and the right only want 2 each. Mm-hmm. The left wants us to be against racism and committed to the poor, and the right wants us to worry about reconciling people back to God and pro-life. But if the other side were to hear you talk about the other two, oh, you've gone off the deep end.
Right.
You know,
They don't
and
want
it's like
those crossovers.
No, you don't get to pick and choose. It's love God and love people.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me. And this is why I love this series. This is why I love questions from Jesus. It's why I love answers from Jesus, because here he is 2,000 years ago with the remedy for these conversations that we're having today. And he's like, hey, if you would understand this, it would in many ways alleviate what you're actually asking and what you want to know. And it's one of the reasons I love these stories. I love these questions. I love seeing how people interact with him. I love seeing everything from his answers, but not just his answers, his posture, right? His posture in the conversations where he has empathy and sympathy for the sinners. His posture when he rolls up into the temple and he's upset and he's angry because there's a way and a reverence about the king that should be withheld and preserved. And so it's just fascinating to me, and that's why I love series like this. And I know I've told you that a million times outside of this, but I'm always intrigued because Jesus is the answer for ethics and moral code, and you get to watch him interact with people, and it's always intriguing to me.
It's really fascinating how much people like to shape Jesus into their image and identify with the pieces of him that align with their worldview. Mm-hmm. But every time you see that happen, it just really simplifies Jesus into a caricature of who he really was. Because when you look at the person of Jesus in the Bible, he was an incredibly complex figure. He didn't fit neatly into anybody's box, you know. And it's no joke that the Pharisees and the Sadducees both railed against him, the left and the right of religious Judaism, right? He refused to bow down to any of that ideology. It was all about, no, Jesus is not left nor right. He is the third way that transcends both.
Yeah, I love it. I know we're at 45 minutes into this, and I have a couple questions. I'm going to ask you one. You know, we said we would try not to answer these from Jesus's perspective, but I do think in regard to one of these questions, it'd be worth having the conversation between the two of us, and then there's potentially another question we might get to or not, depending on how we do with this one. But I want to ask this question because I want to hear your insight. Would love to have the conversation about this. But if all that is true about the church and all the conversations we just had, and we're striving for that and we're understanding Jesus' heart, then here's one of the questions we got submitted. How do you feel about our modern day church? And obviously you was Jesus in that context, but I would love to ask you, how do you think Jesus would feel? And I think this is good because we can put the disclaimer, how do you think, not absolutely this is how Jesus would feel, but how do you think Jesus would feel about our modern day church?
You know, I feel pretty confident in this answer, and it would be that Jesus would love us, Jesus would correct us, and Jesus would point us back to himself. I mean, I think when you look at the letters to the churches in Revelation, that's what he does, right?
Yeah.
It's like, hey, man, I love you guys. Here's what you've done good. I love you.
Yeah.
Here's what you've missed.
Yeah.
And now you need to repent and come back to me.
So let me ask.
I mean, that's not very specific, but
I know. I'm gonna press you for some specifics just because I think it's intriguing.
All right.
What are some of those things you think he would say? Hey, you guys nailed this. You're doing awesome. And then what are some of those things you think he would say? No, this is the part you need to repent on. And obviously, you're lumping all of these church contexts into one.
Man, that's so hard. So I think for me, because at the Orchard, we are an evangelical church in the fact that we are conservative in our theology and focused on mission, which I think are kind of the two markers of evangelical churches. I would say this. I think that we would be commended for our mobilization for mission. I think that we have mobilized the church for mission in a way that has not ever been seen historically.
Because of the resources that we have.
Yeah, I mean, and not just I'm not saying we don't have any Pauls that are going out there and just knocking it out. I'm not saying that we've been the most effective at mission, but when you look at how many churches have been scattered across the Western world, the United States just by itself, the fact that we've been able to mobilize for mission Christians from denominations and backgrounds and get them on the mission field and give them support, I think that's fascinating. The work that's gone into that, I think we'd be commended for that. I think, again, in the stream of American evangelicalism that I feel like we would identify with, I think the other thing we'd be commended for is a high regard for the Word of God. I really do think that we take the Word seriously. Maybe not even to the level that we should on a personal level, but on a corporate level of the, evangelical church. I think we hold Scripture in high regard.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're saying that as a whole, like not just our church, but you think the majority of American churches do that.
Yeah. Well, I know the majority of evangelical American churches.
Okay.
That's why I'm trying to focus on just that subset.
Yeah.
I think that what we would be corrected on is that we have fallen in love with programs more than people, that we have tried to systematize the kingdom in a way that it can't be systematized.
Yeah.
Not that programs are bad or that models are bad or that systems are bad, but at the end of the day, it's people.
Yeah.
It's always been people. And then I think that we would be, I got to be honest, I think that we would get our hands slapped for our materialism and wealth.
Yeah, I've heard you say that before, not even like recently, but, a couple years ago, you just said that's one of the things that this era of church is going to be known for in the timeline of eternity is how obsessed we were with material possessions.
Yeah, I don't see any way around it. Like, the church has never been as wealthy as it is today. And again, evangelical church, the Catholic Church is loaded, but they've always been loaded. Yeah, like just treasure trove of riches. And in a lot of ways, the evangelical church has been able to mobilize the wealth of the evangelical church for mission. But at the same time, how much more could we really do if we chose to live well below our means for the sake of the gospel? Because I think a lot of us are content to live within our means for the sake of the gospel.
Yeah.
But what if we were to get willing to live below our means for the sake of the gospel? So I think that is going to be a fault line, or not a fault line, a fault of the evangelical church. And I think the other thing that we would be hit for is our inconsistency around a biblical sexuality. Like, I think we compartmentalize that so much. And I think that, when you look at, sexual identity, homosexuality, you compartmentalize that away from adultery and pornography and just overall lewdness and, promiscuity and, before marriage. And, I just think that Jesus is going to be like, how could you think that you had it so right because you were focused in on these narrow issues that you missed 85% of what was remaining?
Yeah.
And so I think that that's probably one of the things that we would be confronted about.
Well, it's enough conviction for one day. I'll see. No, I'm just kidding. No, that's good. I'm going to ask the second question. It's on here, and I'm going to ask it, but I'm going to preface it by saying every situation is nuanced when it comes to stuff like this. No situation is going to be a complete one-for-one. There may be some incredible similarities, and there may be a ton of consistencies. But I want to preface this question and preface this answer by saying that, and I'm still going to ask the question. And this is one that was submitted to us, not necessarily with the questions for Jesus, but I think it's worth addressing. And if it wasn't anonymous, I'd say, hey, let's just handle it. But obviously, the person asking this question is dealing with this, and I don't want it to be ignored because I think they're reaching for something, right? And so here's the question. How do we go on loving the same after infidelity? Jesus gives the exception for divorce from sexual immorality, but you don't want divorce. You also don't want the continued pain of betrayal.
So, because again, we don't know who asked this question or the context, I'm going to assume that there was infidelity in the marriage, and yet the person who was cheated on wants to stay married. They don't want a divorce. So I think that's pretty clear.
I would agree, yeah.
It's unclear if they're saying, but it doesn't stop. There's still an ongoing. Because to me, if that's the case, I would say you don't have to get a divorce, but you got to change something.
Yeah.
Like, it's simple. But like, if there's no consequences, for behavior, then nothing's going to change. But I'm going to assume this was a, one time, it had a time period where it ended.
Sure.
I'm going to assume that when I answer this. Here's what I would say. I would say that you do not have to get divorced, right? Because they said in the question that Jesus gives the exception of divorce. I would say that divorce is never Jesus's ultimate desire for any marriage. Even if he would allow it, that's not the desired outcome. Sometimes we're not left with any other choice, but I don't think that's the desired outcome. Number two, I think the question itself may be a little bit inherently flawed when the question is, how do you go on loving the same after? I don't think you do. I don't think you can. I think something like that inherently changes the relationship, but I don't know that in and of itself means that you can't love after, or even that the love can't grow deeper after. You look at the...
So to be clear, you're saying there could be two ends of that pendulum. One could be, maybe I don't love them the same, as in less. The other is, man, we persevered through this, and I love them more on the other side of this.
I think it is. I wouldn't say it's a pendulum. I would say it's a spectrum.
Sure.
But I think inherently it's different. Whether it's more or less, it's different.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
So Adam and Eve, the Garden of Eden, God visited them, cool of the day. Sin broke that relationship. Mm-hmm. When Jesus redeems and restores the sin-broken world, we're not going to get that relationship back. Mm-hmm. We're going to get something different.
Yeah.
Now, in our case, we know because of what Paul writes in Romans and what we see in Revelation, that relationship is going to be better than the one that we lost in the garden. But either way, it's going to be different.
Yeah.
Right? So I think in this marriage, that sin has shattered the innocence, quote unquote, of the marriage. But that doesn't mean that there still can't be love.
Yeah.
It just means that love is going to be different. The reason that I know that there can be love still is because, like we talked about Sunday, regardless of how we feel, we can choose to act differently.
Yeah.
We can choose to act loving. And I would have to believe in this context, even not knowing it,
right,
that if we act out of love, if we choose forgiveness, if we choose not to hold past transgressions against someone, if we choose to move forward and not fall victim to our feelings, then eventually feelings will catch up to the actions.
What is that movie, to affirm what you're saying? It's a Christian movie, Firehouse.
Fireproof.
Fireproof. And that's the premise of that, right?
Yeah, I guess in a lot of ways it is.
Sin broke the relationship. It was not infidelity like it sounds like in here, but I believe it was pornography addiction, maybe, and infidelity. And
I don't remember.
But it is based on a true story.
It was pornography because he threw out his computer.
Right.
I remember that, but I don't remember more.
But the premise was, I'm going to do X amount of acts per day to love them, and eventually, and this is based on a true story, you see the relationship restored.
Well, what flipped in that scenario was it was the guy who broke the marriage who was committing to these acts. In this case, it sounds like the person who was sinned against who is going to have to commit to those acts to change their heart.
Yeah.
So, but I still think true. Like, I'm not promising you that you're ever going to feel different. I believe that you will if you want it and you to continue to choose love.
It's good. I love it. That's one of the benefits we get the podcast. We don't have to duck some of these things. And so, so I wanted to bring it up.
It's a tough question.
It is. And hear the heart behind it, which stinks, but also hopefully you found some hope in that if that was you that asked that. Man, that's all I got. I know we're 58 minutes in. I would say this. I would tell you guys thank you a ton for the support on the podcast, because even on a week where we didn't have a podcast released, we had 38 downloads. Which is pretty cool. So if you haven't listened to some of those,
literally 3 dozen plus.
3 dozen plus on a week we didn't have a podcast.
But it's the week we didn't have a podcast. That's cool about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would also say if you haven't listened to any of those past episodes, go check them out, especially on a week where maybe you don't have as much catch up to play because we missed a week. But go listen to them. We love your thoughts. Truly, this platform is designed to be engaging. We have a place for you to submit questions.
Yeah, we are not doing this for the masses.
Yeah,
we're doing this for the orchard.
Yeah.
And so engage with us. You know us. We're not voices in your ears. You know who we are. Like, engage in the podcast.
Yeah, trade me Nico Collins. Do the whole thing.
That's what we said. But I will say, we got a minute before we get out of here.
Yeah.
We got some cool stuff that is coming up quickly.
We do. 2 things. Would love for... How about this? I'll unpack the first one. You unpack the second one. The first one is next Sunday night. This coming Sunday night, based on when you listen to this. Night of worship, 6:30, Brantford High School Auditorium. Such a cool time together as we do a night of worship, because we get all 3 locations, plus some, right? We get people who don't come to the orchard under that roof, praising Jesus together. I think what I love about it is it's such a cool picture of the kingdom from top to bottom. We're there, we're worshiping, we're taking communion together. It's what his church does, and so...
Well, I'm excited about that. It has been different this year, only doing communion at nights of worship. But man, it really has done what I would hope it would do, in the sense that it has made us remember that this is something just special, that's just not a tack on at the end of the service. Like, this is a big deal. This is part of who we are as the church.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree entirely. And then the next thing is O-Day. So tell us a little bit about O-Day, because I'm not a veteran on O-Day. I've actually never been at the Orchard while we've had one. So
So O-Day is something that was started before I came to the Orchard. But after the Orchard was multi-site, I believe is when the first O-Day happened. And the idea is, man, we just want to get out and hang out together and have a good time. Some of the first O-Days were at Camp Kalakwa near High Springs, that little water park area. It has gotten very expensive and very hard to book, so we haven't gone back there yet. But this year, we are going to the water, but it's going to be on the Swanee River.
Yes.
And so we are doing O-Day at Camp Anderson down near Old Town. And it's really going to be just like a fun, cool family reunion with people that you choose to like. You don't have to like just because they're kin to you, you know?
Absolutely.
And so there's going to be a lot of cool activities that we're going to have available there that the camp already has available. The pool will be open. There's a blob on the river. They have the jelly ball blasters. There's, if you're like, listen to this, and you're like, Chip, I'm not going to do any of that because, one, I don't want to, and two, I'm old.
Lame.
They have a big covered pavilion. You can bring a lawn chair, big fans where you can just hang out and visit, snack bar open. So really the whole point of it is just a time for us to get together, hang out as a church, just be together. And I think that there is value in that as a multi-site church.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be a lot of fun. Did you mention baptisms?
No, I didn't. Yeah. We are going to be doing baptisms at the river there, and so that's going to be fun. We're excited about doing that. So the baptisms, there's always people who want to get baptized at the river. This is a great chance for that.
Yes.
The other thing I would mention is this is a great opportunity to invite somebody who's been invited to church who just never would come to church because they felt weird. Bring them to O-Day.
Bring them.
Let them just meet folks you go to church with.
Yeah.
It's not a church. We're not doing church stuff. We're just hanging out. Be a good time.
Yeah.
So it's a good front door. Baptism, time to hang out. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Can I tell you this real quick? One of the things I love about our church, it's full of some pretty normal people. And that's just not always true. So O-Day's a great opportunity to come meet some of our normal people and make some connections if you haven't already, but you've been wondering how. So,
well, I think, I will say this because I can't not, every time I hear that, normal people, I heard a pastor say one time, and it has stuck with me. He said, sometimes the greatest evangelism tool you have is just being normal.
Normal.
And not normal as in falling in with the world, because I know that's what some people are probably going to think. Well, we're not supposed to be normal. And I know that.
Yeah,
I know that.
Sure.
What it means is you ain't got to be weird.
It's true.
You just be a dad, a mom, a kid who loves Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Be normal, and you would be surprised how engaging that is for people. One of my favorite things, I know you get this, AJ, is when they find out, oh, wait, you're a pastor?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, yeah.
Covers
Well, you're normal. I was like, well, nobody who knows me would say that, but I appreciate the sentiment,
Yeah, agree. The stigma. We try not to tip our hand until the last minute.
That's right.
So, well, that's good, man. I enjoyed it. It's good to be back. Missed last week, but good to be back.
That's good stuff. I'm looking forward to some fun projects we have today that we're not going to talk about.
Some people are saying we're shooting a video today. That's just what people are saying.
It's going to be interesting to see.
Here we go.
And the fun stuff that's coming up. So it's going to be a good time at the Orchard.
All right, guys. We will catch you next week.
See ya.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Let's Talk About That. We hope it encouraged and challenged you as we continue to grow in this journey of faith and embrace community. If you have more questions, thoughts, or feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out to us through our social media channels or visit our website and stay connected. Your questions are what make this podcast a dynamic and enriching experience. If you found today's discussion meaningful, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a review. Your engagement helps us spread the message and connect with others who may find value in these conversations. Until next time, we hope this episode inspired you and will help you bring Sunday's message into your week ahead. Keep the conversation alive, and remember, we're all on this journey together.